And we know that bones get bored. So they need lots of different stimuli. And so often you've got those sort of what we call in the UK old wives' tales, where we've got those traditional beliefs that we shouldn't jump and bounce during our growth spurts, that we maybe should protect kids as they're growing. And yet, nothing could be further from the truth. The body needs lots of different stimuli. It needs to run, it needs to jump, it needs to hop, needs different surfaces. So one of the things that we're not keen on is kids specializing before puberty in just one sport, because too many of those stimuli to the bone are the same. They're very repetitive, and that bone, as I say, gets bored. When we give it new stimuli, the body then goes, wow, if they're going to do that again, I'd better make myself stronger. So it goes through this sort of process where more bone is laid down where we need it most. And over time, that then becomes tougher. So we're really looking to create an environment where we give them lots of novel, different stimuli, let them try out different things in the hope that this will promote really good bone health.
I love that phrase, your bone gets bored. I'm
Yeah.
totally stealing that. That's so brilliant. And I'm really glad you mentioned the issue of early specializing, especially before or maybe even during the growth spurt, and just how that same movement over and over again is eventually just kind of like stagnating the development of the bone. So thank you for mentioning that because we talk about that all the time on the podcast, the issues with early specialization. But do you have anything else to add to that, just for the parents listening whose daughter is playing year round in one sport right now? Like any like research or thoughts you'd add to that to really encourage them to not do this?
I think it's quite interesting that I can sit with different hats on. So if I'm talking about my overhead athletes with like let's say our tennis players who are usually a single specialization sport. In the UK, we have cricket, you guys have baseball. Now, what we know is that there are adaptations to the bone that occur during the years prior to puberty, particularly in the shoulder and the hip, that actually probably offer some protection. So sometimes there's a benefit to starting these sports early and getting the bone used to doing some of these activities, and it tends to uh, maybe give a little bit of long-term protection. In our lower backs, we know that in some of the sports like serving at tennis and in cricket, where they're sort of leaning over to the one side regularly, the bone actually is really clever. And on the side that's being compressed, it actually builds up increased density on the side that's being squished to try and protect it. So there's a point, and it's a balancing act between making sure they do enough of the sports that they love and they want to specialize in long term to get those early advantages. Post puberty, they're much, much harder to get. And we also know that it takes many years to get those adaptations. So the kids have got to do it if they want to get stronger in the areas they need it. But what we know is that there's just so many injuries, bones being one of them, that benefit from multi-directional movement, novel stimuli. So I think even in the football academies in the UK now, we're seeing children are having one day in the week where they do loads of different things, just new sports, gymnastics. I'd want all little children to learn to do forward rolls and cartwheels and just like build up those playful things at the park, swinging from the monkey bars, to just develop their bodies more holistically and try and keep some one day in the week, even if you're in a single specialization sport, where you give the body a break.
Now, I want to talk about stress fractures a little bit because you mentioned the low back, and actually, I had a stress fracture in my L5, I think, is like the lower, but only on the left side. But here's what happened. I was a left-footed soccer player, and that
Mhm.
season, I was constantly shooting with my left foot over and over and over again. It was too much. And then I was also playing soccer and lacrosse in the same season, so there's a lot of overlap with the running type movements. And then my spine just broke down and I got a hairline fracture. And it kind of started off as a dull pain and I didn't really take it seriously. And then it turned into, oh, this is a sharp shooting pain. What is this? And then I had to get a bone scan, and there it was, the hairline fracture. So it definitely was a result of that same movement over and over again.
Okay, so lots um, to work on. There is a brilliant description of exactly what we would describe as a classic history. So we see that young players, and we see, traditionally these hairline cracks in the lower backbone. We used to call them all stress fractures, but we realized that, like in your story, there was probably a window in which the bone was bruised, was sending you a little text message going, do you think you could listen to me? Because I'm not really coping with what I'm doing. And you kind of went, the voice wasn't loud enough. It didn't shout really stop. It wasn't so severe. So at which point that lovely little bone bruise that was just trying to go, I just need a couple of weeks to make myself stronger. And we ignored it. And so the body didn't get it like what it needed. And so it went on to go, okay, well, I'm going to give you a much bigger shout now. This pain's going to be a whole lot worse. And unfortunately, you missed that bone bruise and you went straight to getting that hairline fracture. So I think what we need to do is really educate the parents, the coaches, the school PE teachers, and the kids to go, one injury that we want to hear about right on day one, however mild, however small that text message seems from your lower back, it is something that isn't necessarily serious. But if we only had listened in that first week, a couple of weeks later, your bone would have gone, okay, she wants to do this again. Let's put some more bone down where we need it. Let's give it a couple of weeks to toughen up and then gradually let her go back to sport over the next few weeks. Done. You'd have adapted to that extra kicking, that extra running, and gone, I'm okay. But what happens is it's not severe pain in the beginning. It's just a mild background ache. Sometimes it just feels like a heaviness, stiffness. We get muscle spasm, but then none of them severe enough to stop the child playing. So usually when the likes of me get hold of them, they've already developed maybe pain on the other side or potentially an injury that now is probably season ending. These things aren't career ending. All the kids with a stress fracture will get back to sport. I don't think I've yet had one that doesn't. So it's important to understand that they're not serious, but they're really inconvenient. And so they will probably take kids out for anything between 4 and 6 months, depending on the grade of the injury. So my primary message is, let's break down what you said is the pain came in your kicking side
Mhm.
because you'd done a lot of activity that you hadn't trained for. So in our baseball players or tennis players, what we're going to see is that right-sided tennis, right-sided throwing, they almost always get the pain on the other side, the left-sided low back pain. What we then have is that we're not sure. I've been looking at some work with the FA, looking to say, well, is it in the kicking leg, as in the swinging the leg back into that arched position, or is it actually because we pivot through our stance leg a lot more and cause a lot of rotation? And we don't know the answer to that yet. And it may be different between boys and girls.
Mhm.
So fundamentally, you get this low back pain from an activity that either you've done more of, you've not trained for. And sometimes what we need to think about, and we can touch on this in a minute, is sometimes it's a drop in your capacity. Maybe at that time you were growing, maybe you weren't sleeping as well, maybe you weren't eating enough. So a combination of factors. But importantly here, what we've got is you did more than your body was capable of achieving at that time. And so the body then starts to break down, and we get this bone bruising, which, if left unchecked, will go into a stress fracture.
That's such a good point. I mean, there were so many factors that went into it. And now I do remember it was during a period of growth for me. I was like 13 or 14 years old, which is still kind of a precarious time for a young female athlete. And then add on the two sports in a single season on top of that.
Correct.
Like, I'm all for
Correct.
early sampling, I'm all for trying multiple sports. But the caveat is if it's in the same season and there's a lot of overlap with the movements in those sports, then yeah, that could lead to an overuse injury. And it's so crazy because it did start so dull, but like you said, you kind of have to take that signal seriously and not brush it under the rug. So I guess my next question